Welcome back to another C Designs woodworking video. In today's video, I'm going to be helping my wife change out our homeschool corner here so it's a little bit more functional. This year, one of my daughters has pre-algebra and she's having to do videos. And right now we have her set up on some tray tables with a small TV. So we kind of need a workstation so that she can sit, watch her videos, and have a nice place to write. Plus, it'll help get this area a little more organized. So follow along as we complete this project. But we can't do this project here, so we need to head to the shop. Alright, so let me give you a quick rundown of this project. This project is going to consist of an L-shaped workstation right there in that corner. So I went to my local hardware store and I bought a sheet of plywood and 3 2x4s, but I don't want it to be 2 inches thick. So what I ended up doing was dividing the 2x4s in half. Stay tuned and I'll show you how I did that here in just a minute, where you're not losing a lot of material by making sure you pay attention to which saw you use, because I don't have a nice big bandsaw to resaw wood, and so therefore I have to use other methods, and I'm going to show you how I did that, and it could work for you, it may not. But stay tuned and let's see how this project all comes together. So I broke out my jaw horse, and if you don't know what this is, it's a pretty sweet little sawhorse. It actually has a clamp in it that you tighten down with your foot, and you'll see right there I tightened it down with my foot, and it has a quick release switch, and then you just pop it with your foot and it'll open right back up. But I was able to clamp the piece vertical, not horizontal, so that way I could start cutting down into the 2x4 to divide it in half. I used the battery skill saw to do this because the blade on my battery skill saw is only a 1/16 of an inch, where my regular skill saw and the table saw is an 1/8 of an inch. And so therefore I'm not cutting and losing too much material as I do this. Now, how I kept the cut straight is I have a rip guide on the skill saw, so that way it stays nice and straight. I also did 2 or 3 shallow passes with the blade, and I flipped the board over back and forth, and this allowed for me to almost cut all the way through. Then I took it over to the bandsaw and cut the middle of the 2x4 where the saw blade couldn't reach. Now, I know in the beginning of this video I said I didn't have a bandsaw that could resaw the wood. Well, I really don't. This saw blade and this bandsaw is very flimsy, and it would actually walk all through that 2x4 if I had tried to resaw it as a full piece of wood. Since I had taken out the majority of the material with the skill saw, the bandsaw was able to just cut that little bit of wood that was left, and it gave me a nice straight line to follow. Then I ran all the pieces through the planer just to knock down where it's 2 different sizes of saw blades, because the skill saw had a 1/16 of an inch saw blade and the bandsaw has a real thin saw blade. Now, not everybody has a planer where you can run the pieces of wood through to knock down that high spot. You can hit it with a sander just to smooth it out just a little bit, but this is going to be the bottom of the desktop, so you're not even going to see that part. Then it was time to glue up both sections of this worktop. I have a smaller section and a larger section, and once I got it all glued up and in clamps, it was time to let it dry. Before I glued up the tops of this workstation, I did run the pieces through the table saw to knock off that rounded edge of a 2x4 because I wanted nice square edges, and it also helps everything glue up nice and tight. After the glue had dried, it was time to start sanding these workstation tops. I started out with the belt sander with an 80 grit sandpaper. It was a little bit more aggressive because I wanted to get the extra glue squeeze out, sand it off, and start getting it to that final smooth finish. Also, being a construction grade lumber, it needs a little bit more sanding. You can buy what is called S4S wood, which is all pre-sanded, and it's square 4 sides. That is going to cost you a little bit more money, so if you don't mind doing a little extra sanding, you can save a little bit of money by buying this lumber. I used the orbital sander with a couple different grit sandpapers. I used 120 and then 220 to bring it down to that final smooth finish, but the orbital sander is just a little easier to get the final touches on this workstation top. Then it was time to start cutting down the plywood for the carcasses of the cabinets that the workstation top is going to sit on. Funny thing is these cabinets are going to be used for my kids' school books, and they decided they're going to call them their lockers. And what would school be without lockers? So let's call them lockers. Nothing fancy here. These cabinet boxes are just going to be very simple, lockers are going to be very simple. Once I had all the side pieces cut out, I took the side pieces over to the bandsaw to cut out an inset for the toe kick. Now you could use a jigsaw for this, but since I had the bandsaw, it was just easier for me to use. And after cutting several pieces that are going to connect the two sides together, it was time to put a bunch of pocket holes in all these pieces. Now again, if you don't have a pocket hole jig, you can always just glue these pieces together, or just use some screws and screw from the outside in. Then it was time to start assembling these carcasses for the lockers. So I started off, but whoa, what just happened here? Clearly I was trying to be a little too ambitious, so let's just start off and do one side at a time. Much safer. So once I got one side attached, then I added the second side, put a clamp on it so it's nice and tight while I screwed in the screws. And it was a whole lot easier holding one piece of plywood and not try to juggle two. And after spinning it around, I then added on this backside piece. And since the cabinet was already on its top, all I had to do was attach the bottom. I made sure that the pocket hole screws were on the very bottom so they would not be seen inside the cabinet once it was flipped over right side up. This is also a good place to use a combination square because you can set the height of the combination square and just make sure that you check all four corners so that the height from the bottom to the bottom of the cabinet is the same. Then it was time to install the toe kicks on the very front of the cabinet. Now I also added a little bit of edge banding right there on the front of that plywood just to hide those layers of plywood. It was then time to add some strips to the front of this plywood. I had some ambrosia maple laying around the workshop, so this worked out nice for the front of these cabinets. My original plan on these cabinets was to actually have a front frame with some doors, but Aaron and I changed it up and decided to make these more like shelves than actual cabinets with doors. So after getting all the strips cut to the right length for the width and the height, I then added a little bit of glue on the edge, not too much because I didn't want it to squeeze out, and then just with my brad nailer I put a couple brads in the front of the strips just to hold everything in while that glue dried. And while I was out in the shop trying not to nail my finger to these cabinets, my wife graciously started staining the top part of this workstation. And with editing magic, we now have the top stained and finished, ready to be installed. Oh, wait a minute. We still have to stain the cabinets. Never mind, she's on it. I shouldn't have doubted her for a minute. Alright, so I ran into a little bit of a problem in installing these shelves in the boxes for this workstation. I didn't want to drill the holes prior to assembling it, which I should have, and I've figured that out now. Let me turn around and show you what my problem is here. So I've created this template here with my reference hole that I was going to drill in so that they would be the same height distance all the way around and the shelf would sit level. But when I go to put my drill in here, the drill, I'm hitting one side and the other side at the same time. So my drill is too wide, and I wanted to use these wooden dowels, and I was going to glue them in there and they were going to hold the shelf in. So I had to go back to the drawing board, and this is where sometimes discussing things with other people helps out. And so I was talking with my wife about it, and she said, why don't I make like a strip on each side that the shelf will sit in, and I can just screw that in to the side of the box. And I've done that before, but I just never really thought of it in this case. So sometimes discussing things with people can help you in the long run. So when you hit a roadblock, don't always just sit there and try to figure things out yourself. Sometimes discussing things with other people will help you figure things out. So I started cutting down the strips that I needed for these shelves. And at this point in the video, I just want to stop and say thank you. If you've made it this far in the video, we appreciate you sticking around and watching. And if you liked what you've seen in this video, make sure you hit that like button. That'll help spread this video to more people. And the best way to know when more content is uploaded, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Then you'll know when new videos are uploaded. I didn't get any video of this, but once I cut these strips down, I went ahead, I stained them, and I installed them inside the cabinets at about 13 inches. So that way you can get nice tall books and notebooks on either shelf. And it was finally time to start installing this little workstation. And I know my wife was happy to see this start coming into the house and being put together. I wanted to make sure that this was as level as possible, so I did bring in my level and make sure I leveled up the bases. I did have to put a shim underneath this one to keep it from rocking, because you know houses these days always have level floors. Yeah, right. Then after getting the next box set and checking the level on it, I did also want to make sure that I had enough space for a chair, because this is again where my daughter's going to be watching her video, so I want to make sure there was enough leg room. Then I brought in the top to this workstation and started installing this on top of the cabinets. This is where things got a little crazy. It was too tight. I had even cut the top of this 1/4 of an inch smaller than what the original measurements were, and it was still a tight fit between the pantry cabinet and the wall. I tried to fit it into this area with a tap here and a tap there. Back and forth I went, tapping it, but it just would not go any further. I mean, come on. Haven't framers ever heard of a square? Can't you make these walls square so it could fit in there nicely? So after taking it back out to the shop, trimming down the sides, I brought it back in, put it back on top of the cabinets, and I had to do my little tap again to get it back into the corners. A little tap here and a little tap there, back and forth, working it right up into the corner. And with this go around, we had success. We now have the first section of the workstation in place, nice and tight, literally tight. Then it was time to install the smaller section of this L-shaped workstation. Thankfully, I didn't have to squeeze this top between a wall and a cabinet. I wanted to zoom in on this part of the build because when I did the larger workstation top, when I routed the round over, I went all the way down, and I wasn't supposed to. These two pieces were supposed to come together nice and tight. So using a cove bit, I made this little lip that will allow this smaller section to sit on that round over and be a nice tight joint. And there you have it. A nice, easy, simple workstation that helps organize this corner, but also is very functional so that my daughter can watch her videos and not have to hunker down on those tray tables. She can sit up, pay attention, and I think it's going to help her do much better this school year. And then I've got these cabinets here down low so they can organize their school books. They're calling them their lockers. So they can put their school books in their lockers and keep everything nice and organized. Again, thanks for watching our video. And as always, we hope that we have inspired you to maybe get out there and use your creativity and your imagination to conquer some of your projects. Please like and share, and we'll catch you on the next video.